Hello, 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 1,000 hellos, and welcome to another episode of Across the Dinerverse, searching for the heart and soul of America, one diner at a time. How are you? I'm John Murphy, writer and producer on the CBS Science and Technology series Innovation Nation, which airs Saturday mornings, and please check your local TV guide for airtime in your area. It's a great show. I think you'll really enjoy it. And now I travel the country interviewing people over triple cheeseburgers, pineapple smoothies, and bloomin' onions. It's a terrible Australian accent. Anyway, I talk to people about their lives, their hang-ups, and how they're dealing with the quagmire that is America right now. Right here at the top of the podcast, I want to give a big shout out to one of the show's patrons, Elena Andrews, who dropped me a note saying, I just binged 11 episodes in a row. Wow. Driving 10 hours from Ohio down to Auburn, Alabama for a family event. They were awesome, but I really got into the true crime series about the Hoyt murders in Nebraska. Keep up the great work. Well, thank you very much, Elena. I really appreciate that. And if you haven't checked out that true crime series yet, look for Love and Murder, parts 1 through 5, which are episodes 16 through 20 on the podcast show site, thedinerverse.com. That's thedinerverse, all one word, .com, or wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Podchaser, whatever. And if you'd like to become a patron, just like Elena, please visit my Patreon page at patreon.com/Dinerverse. And for as little as $3, you can ask me questions or send me comments about the podcast, throw out questions for me to ask other people coming up on the show, get exclusive behind-the-scenes photos and content, or ask me to record a greeting on your smartphone. I swear I will absolutely do it. This week's episode comes once again from Cosmo's Bistro on the famous Route 66 in Glendora, California. And Cosmo, the owner, opens up the place once a week to a 12-step recovery program for alcoholics, which is truly a public service to those who need help. I met a couple of guys there, both in recovery, and they agreed to share their story. And last week we heard from Les, an old-timer with 47 years of sobriety, and his story was really inspiring. This week we're going to kick it up a notch with a tale of one man's journey that, I'm going to be honest, will be hard to listen to at times. But I promise if you hang in there, you will hear an ending that will make your jaw drop and maybe even get you to think about how God or the universe or whatever you believe in can sometimes do things that are completely unexplainable and magical to give us all hope that redemption is possible, no matter what we've done. Now, I do want to warn you if you are triggered by discussions of violence, certain hate groups, or racist ideology, please feel free to skip this episode and come back next week. Otherwise, enjoy the mystery and miracle of recovery, Part 2 from Cosmo's Bistro in Glendora, California. Hello, sir. What's your name?
My name's Tim.
Hi, Tim. What's your story, Tim?
Oh, man. My story is that at one time in my life, I was a pretty messed up character. And through the program of recovery, I got my act together.
So that's why you and Les were meeting here in this restaurant.
Correct.
Are you from Glendora?
I'm originally not from Glendora. I did live around here quite a lot when I was younger. I've been all over the United States, but I was originally born in Covina.
Where would you say you grew up as a kid?
Most formidable years would probably be Azusa, Glendora, and then I moved away for a while. Before I got sober, I was in all kinds of trouble.
What kind of trouble?
Every kind of trouble you can think of. You know, growing up in my family, I was the baby of my family. My next sibling was 9 years older than I was. So I was really the baby of the family. I often say I was an accident, because that's, as an alcoholic, that's sometimes how we think. I don't fit in here. I don't fit in this family structure. For me, my father came from a working class background, didn't have a lot of economic security, which I think as he grew older and became a father and a husband, one of his main priorities was he was never going to struggle. and that meant he was a workaholic.
Mm.
As far as alcoholism in my family goes, on my mother's side, my grandmother was an alcoholic. On my father's side, my grandfather was an alcoholic. But nobody ever talked about it.
So it ran in the family, but it was one of those secrets. Nobody talk about the
It
problem.
wasn't necessarily a secret, but they just didn't talk about it. I remember growing up, my grandmother at Christmas, we used to, well, once I started to get, aware of what was going on, I started to join in, but they would like hide alcohol from grandma because Christmas she would tie one on. But I would see her sneaking wine. And as long as I didn't tell on her, she wouldn't tell on me. So as I got older, I started, sneaking in and drinking during family gatherings because I felt damn uncomfortable.
So it's kind of like mutually assured destruction. So you had to detente.
Yeah, and there was a couple times where she said, "I'm going to tell on you." I said, "You tell on me, and I'm going to tell on you."
And how old were you at this time?
Probably 10, 11 years old.
So you're negotiating with your maternal grandmother over, you keep my secret, I'll keep your secret. We can both drink and do what we want to do.
Right. But what started out as a social sort of thing, a social lubricant turned into a social disaster in my case because I would get in all kinds of trouble, fights, making a fool out of myself. For me, I never really felt like I fit in my family. I never felt a part of. And even in society at large, if you want to call it that, or the kids that I was around, all over, wherever I lived, whatever state I've lived in, whatever school I went to, I always felt like an odd man out.
And how did you cope with that? Drinking,
using other substances. I don't know if we're allowed to talk about other substances, but I definitely did indulge.
Okay, marijuana,
cocaine,
heroin,
acid, heroin, PCP.
Wow. Well, thank God you're still here.
Yeah, I have to pinch myself sometimes and say, when I am around other people that I know have similar backgrounds as mine and who have lived as long as I have lived, which is not very long in the big picture, we're lucky to be here.
What was the worst for you?
When I was a kid growing up, I first went from being a long-haired stoner kid to getting involved with the punk rock scene. And in the early 1980s, the punk rock scene is not like it is today. It was very violent. There was drug use, but it was mostly alcohol. But we did, we would sniff speed and take whites and all that sort of stuff. But in my case, since my father was gone most of the time, working, he was present, but he wasn't present. He was there physically, but that was about it. It was putting a roof over our head and whatnot. And me being the youngest person in among my siblings, they all had kids, moved out. My brother rode off into the sunset on a Harley. My brother, being my primary positive role model.
And he was 9 years older than you.
Right. Was shot by a black man. And
for what reason?
Well, in my head, the story was that they were standing on the corner dealing dope. And it was a dope deal went wrong. Well, recently, probably within the last couple of years, I actually asked my brother, I said, what, I always
he survived.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank God.
Yeah. He still has the bullet in him.
Really?
Yeah.
Inside of it?
Yep. It was too close to his spinal cord to be removed. So it went through one of his main arteries in his heart. I spoke to him about it, and he said, no, they were just minding their own business. They weren't selling dope on the corner. In my head, because I kind of glorified it, the odd thing is about that whole scenario is, yes, it was a family trauma. But as far as my brother's concerned, after a couple of years, he was done. He was done with it. He had moved on. He moved past it, forgave the man who shot him in his mind. The man was... Initially, he was arrested. He was tried for attempted murder. Got off on a hung jury, missed trial, and they wanted to retry the case.
Wow!
And by that time, my brother said, "You know what? I'm done with this. I don't need this."
Right. He just wants to move on with his life.
But for me, I think my perception of things was totally different. I mean, this is before before I got into drugs and drinking. For me, I believe it was a fear-based resentment against black folks. I had this thing in my head that if they're black folks, they want to shoot me.
And how old were you when your brother was shot?
About 10 or 11.
All right, so a very impressionable age.
Right.
Did you witness this?
No.
Okay, you just saw the aftermath of it,
Right.
and saw the pain and everything else. So, as a 10-year-old, you heard the story, and so you got this fear
Right.
into your head that black people want to kill white people.
Yep.
Which is not right.
Right.
Totally bullshit.
Right.
But when you're 10 years old, it can stick
Perception.
in there. It's perception, right?
So
So what happened after that?
Well, as I said, my brothers and sisters moved out of the house, so it was me and my parents, and I had to run to the house in the afternoon.
And you had nowhere to go with this.
Not really, and I didn't really fit in with the people in the neighborhood where I was living. I was a middle class kid, but I never felt a part of them. I always felt, I don't know, lesser than or dirtier than them. I don't know if that makes sense.
You were just insecure.
Right. I was insecure, but I was almost, it was like I had a subconscious, looking back at it, I can see it now, but back then I'm just a little kid. But I didn't like them. I didn't like the middle class kids. So most of the kids that I would hang out with were the kids that live south of Route 66. And as I stated earlier, I did get involved with the punk rock thing. It was very violent, very anti-establishment. Before it was cool.
It's anarchy.
Basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you commit violence on people?
Oh, absolutely.
You busted heads?
Oh, yeah.
With baseball bats and chains and pipes?
Not baseball bats and chains, steel-toe boots, maybe brass knuckles, belts.
Were you looking for fights?
Always.
So you were an enraged person?
Always. Well, it's funny that you say enraged, because when I think of enraged today, I mean, back then I didn't know how to put two and two together. But today I see rage, anger as the underlying causes and conditions of that is usually fear.
Of course.
And I did not recognize that, of course, as a young person. So being involved with that sort of lifestyle, and I wasn't, I was big. I was not necessarily as big as I am. I filled out in my late 20s or in my late teens, early 20s.
Was this violence that you talk about, was it against other punk rockers or was it against black people?
It was against anyone.
All right.
It was against anyone, other punk rockers from different neighborhoods. However, I will tell you, when I was about 17 years old, there was a place that the punk rockers used to hang out. And one of the places, it was called Okie Dogs. It was on Santa Monica Boulevard. And back in the early 80s, that was, Hollywood. We used to go to Hollywood because that's where a lot of the concerts were. And there was a large and growing gay population. There was a lot of street kids, prostitutes, drug dealers, you name it. And we used to hang out at this place that we believed was our Mecca, our hangout. That's where we would go after concerts. And we used to get in fights with gay kids and street kids. We used to chase them off. And there was one thing that we had in common was we didn't like the fact that, drag queens or young gay hookers were hanging out at our place. And there was violence on numerous occasions. Now, there was one occasion where I was involved. I was probably involved with more than one, but there's one that I remember specifically where we left a young kid in the alley, beaten. We didn't know whether we had killed him or not.
Oh, my God.
And, we...
Because he was gay? Or
right.
gay prostitute?
Yeah. The double fear factor with that one, right? Gay and a prostitute and a youngster. And we jumped in our cars afterwards and drove back to the suburbs and pretended like it never happened. Which, these days I try to think of who my actions affect. Does it just affect the person who I'm beating up? Does it affect in any way that I treat somebody else? It can affect their entire family. It can entire their life, their trauma, or whatever. And I didn't think about it for over 20 years. This is when I'm 17 years old. This is prior to me getting.
You were 17 when this all happened.
Right. This is even before I got involved with really heavy stuff as I got older. Now, I just did not care, and I continued to drink and use. You know, I did try to join the military.
They wouldn't take you?
They wouldn't take me. One of the main reasons they wouldn't take me was when I was a youngster, and I kind of left this out, but I think it's relevant. I got hit by a car when I was 8 years old, and it caused one of my legs to be shorter than the other. I was in a body cast for almost a year. Mommy wrapped me in cotton wool. Don't do sports. You can't do track. You can't do all this other kind of stuff. You have an excuse, Timmy.
Right.
So when I tried to join the military and they wouldn't take me, I was devastated. By this time, I had a mindset. I even had friends that called me fascist. Did I know what a fascist was? Probably not truly. There was what they call skinheads and Ku Klux Klan and all that sort of thing. But within the punk scene, we started to see skinheads. Now, when most people think of skinheads, they think what the media tells them. They think all skinheads are white, racial, Nazi, violent thugs, and it's really not the case at all. In fact, most people have been sold a major lie through the media. The original.
Were you a skinhead?
I became one.
You became a skinhead?
Yes. And most skinheads, if you see a skinhead today, unless they have a Confederate flag or a swastika on them, most of them are fervently anti-racist or don't want anything to do with politics. The first skinheads were a mixture between working class white kids and Jamaicans, Jamaican immigrants. And most of the music that they listen to is Jamaican-based music.
Jamaican immigrants.
Jamaican music.
Black Jamaican
yes,
immigrants.
Yes.
Were also skinheads.
Yes. I know skinheads. I know Filipino skinheads. I know Hispanic skinheads.
It's kind of a gang mentality. You want to belong to something, right? And if you identify with the same kind of group, with the same kind of mental outlook, and you're angry and you feel like you want to take control in your own violent way, you're going to join them.
Well, the whole thing about the whole skinhead thing. See, when I first got involved, the military wouldn't take me. We had just bombed Libya. All my friends were joining the service. I couldn't go, so I thought I was going to fight on the home front. I'm gonna be a home front warrior, and it started out patriotic. There was some racial elements to it, but it wasn't. Once I got involved, the propaganda that's involved, the cult-like mentality that's involved, you're very insulated. You don't trust the other, no matter who it is.
Is there a difference between a skinhead and a neo-Nazi?
Yes.
Were you either one of them? I said you're a skinhead. Were you a neo-Nazi?
Yeah, I was a neo-Nazi skinhead. And
so you combine the terms.
Neo-Nazi skinheads would fight with what they call traditional skinheads. Traditional skinheads are the ones that like the music and the ska and the reggae and all that other kind of stuff. And they call themselves sharps, skinheads against racial prejudice. And we would fight with them all the time. But the best way to describe the difference between the two is one is completely and utterly walking around with cracked lenses.
Which one is the cracked lens, the neo-Nazi or the skinhead?
The cracked lenses are the
neo-Nazis.
Yeah. In fact, traditional skinheads call racist skinheads boneheads.
Okay.
See, a lot of people don't know.
I'm glad there's a morality there somewhere, right? There's a line.
A lot of people don't know these differences because, the news, you had Geraldo Rivera getting his nose broken on national television. You had Oprah Winfrey being called a monkey on national television, all this sort of stuff. So that's when most people hear skinhead, that's the first thing they think.
And feeding that was this 10-year-old trauma that you experienced, your brother being shot by a black guy. It just kind of it just sparked that in you. I'm assuming. Was that right?
Yep. So I jumped in head first.
Oh, man.
Nobody recruited me. I approached them. In fact, I went to North County, San Diego, and called up a man by the name of Tom Metzger.
Oh, yeah. Remember that name.
And next thing you know, I'm sitting in his office and we're talking politics. And he's telling me all the things. And I'm drinking. In fact, I remember drinking whiskey with him.
Okay, so Tom Metzger. Who was this guy? Do you remember that name? Thomas Linton Metzger was an American white supremacist, neo-Nazi skinhead leader, and Klansman. He founded White Aryan Resistance, or War, a neo-Nazi organization back in 1983, and was the subject of numerous lawsuits and government investigations. During the 1970s, Metzger joined the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, which was led by David Duke, and he eventually became the Grand Dragon of the state of California. According to Stephen Atkins, author of the Encyclopedia of Right-Wing Extremism in Modern American History, Metzger's ideology differs from other white supremacists by rejecting the basic tenets of the Christian identity movement because he considers himself to be the champion of something called the third position. Metzger believed the United States should be divided into designated areas for different racial groups, except Asian Americans, who he thought should be expelled from the U.S. Metzger died in Hemet, California on November 4th, 2020, at the age of 82. And how old are you now?
24.
Okay, 24. All right.
24 years old. What ended up happening within the skinhead culture, drinking was a thing. Drugs was not a thing. Which a lot of people scratch their head because they see these people on meth and they think, that there is that element does still exist, but the groups that I associated with, if they even smoked marijuana, they got beat down because the whole premise was drugs are for non-white people. And if the white race is to survive, we must abstain from consuming poisonous things. I mean, there's even dietary rules in some of these groups.
So back to Tom Metzger.
Right. So in the late 1980s, I was involved in a racial attack. It was a benefit for the homeless concert. But
you're just a great guy.
Well, but us skinheads, we knew that there would be left-wingers at this benefit for the homeless concert. So we showed up and started causing mayhem, and we ended up getting kicked out. As we were leaving, there was a Middle Eastern couple. One thing led to another. Somebody was giving somebody hard looks. Racial epithets were said, and next thing you know, we're in a brawl. And next thing you know, I wake up in jail.
Mm-hmm.
Front page on the face on the front page of the LA Times and on CNN and all that fun stuff, and ended up going on trial. And most people would find themselves in that situation and say, check themselves. What am I doing? What sort of life am I living here? But if anything, it catapulted me even further into that movement and that mindset. Well, that's because I was led to believe that it was a Jewish conspiracy, a Jewish judge, a Jewish lawyer, Jewish media, propaganda.
Who told you all that?
This is involved with the propaganda. That's what we're
told.
Inside
the neo-Nazi realm.
Correct. The Jews run the world.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. Mom and Dad bailed me out. One thing Daddy never told me was he loved me. But his way of telling me that he loved me, this sounds kind of weird, he bought me a bulletproof vest because we had a lot of people wanting to get us because we were all over the TV. If that's not a macho thing, I don't know what else is, but it's kind of ironic. So I'm out on bail. I'm a celebrity, skinhead, prisoner of war. I'm on trial for my political beliefs.
Inside the skinhead community, were you kind of elevated?
Right.
Were you kind of like,
Correct.
He's our rock star skinhead dude?
In my head, I was. I don't know if I truly was.
Right.
But my ego was,
You're badass.
Yeah, I'm a bad. Well, during the confrontation, I held a shopping cart above my head and threw it at a crowd of people. I had baseball bats that I didn't use. Thank God I didn't use them because I had used them earlier that weekend when I was drunk on some other people.
Yeah.
It sort of started me thinking, at least on the not drinking situation. That and the fact that Tom Metzger called me into his office one day, like going to the principal's office, right? He says, you know, you have great leadership qualities. You're an intelligent young man. We need people like you. However, your drinking can be a security issue. He didn't make it a personal thing. You know, my father would tell me, you're a drunk, you're a lush,
Right.
you know, get a job, whatever. He didn't do any of that. He made
It was an obstacle for you having greater success in the neo-Nazi skinhead movement.
Correct.
Or being an effective weapon and leader
Correct.
within the unit, so to speak.
Correct. And I ended up quitting drinking. I remember my sponsor, the sponsor who I chose, ironically, was a Hispanic guy from East LA. I thought he was smooth. I thought he was cool. And I didn't remember this, but he had recently, probably within the last couple of years, told me, he said, if you want me to sponsor you, you need to shake, there's a black man in the meeting. He says, you need to go shake that black man's hand. And I did it. You know, prior to that, that wouldn't happen. And if it did happen, I would kind of wipe my hand off on my leg or something afterwards because, you know, who knows, there might be, the black might, you know, be germs or something. I mean, that's how my mind thought at that time.
So you were still...
Slightly, yes.
You still had resentment and anger issues.
And fear.
And fear of the African-American race.
Sure.
Totally unwarranted.
Of course. And I thought I was going to get transferred from one county to another before I started doing my other time, and it didn't happen. They let me out for a week. I didn't drink, but I will tell you, it was 4th of July weekend, and Huntington Beach, where most of my friends were hanging out, we were involved with a lot of violence. I figured, what do I got to lose? What am I going to do? Throw me in jail? I'm already going. You know, I got lucky in that they did not have hate crime laws at that time.
Today you would be in prison.
Yes. In fact, I have very close associates who have spent, you know, over a decade in jail because of similar sort of activities.
In jail or in prison?
In prison.
It's a whole different run. It's a whole different stretch.
However, I did go to the worst county jail if it's possible. They put me in Supermax.
In LA County?
Yeah, which is basically a prison. One of the things that I like to tell people is when I was in jail, not one of my so-called racial brothers or sisters put money on my books, wrote me a letter.
Yeah, they abandoned you.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
And so when I first got out, I was a little bit angry. I just avoided him. And then I started getting phone calls. He's been out for such and such amount of time. How come he's not? The first thing, you know, from my perspective, when we had situations like that, the first thing in our mind is snitch. There must be a rat. So I said, well, I don't want them to think I'm a rat because I'm not a rat. Never have been a rat.
You didn't turn anybody in?
No, never
You didn't turn over names and addresses and phone numbers and locations?
Never would.
Clubhouse location?
And I've been asked. I've been asked by FBI agents.
Yeah, I bet. Can I ask you why you never done it? Because obviously now you're a different person.
Right.
So why did you not do it? Why did
it's just a code. It's just a code.
But wouldn't it be the right thing?
And part of it is fear, too, because, you know, snitches get stitches and bullets and things like that.
Right.
So that's partially a part of it, too. I was one of the only sober ones in the group. I mean, they drank. And nowadays, there's a lot of sober people involved with that lifestyle. They call it straight edge.
So how did you get out of it? What was the turning point? What was the inspiration to turn from this effed up ideology that black people are bad and threatening and I got to kill them before they kill me kind of attitude?
You know, I like to, a lot of people think it's some big mystery sort of thing, but I think it's human nature, human development. You know, I was already a late bloomer as it was, but most people, including myself, once they get late 20s, early 30s, they've just gotten out of the military. They've got a divorce. They've just gotten out of prison. They've spent their entire 20s drinking and partying. And they kind of look around and say, you know, what do I do here? I have to start being a responsible person. In my case, I met a young lady as I was passing out hate literature, granted, in Huntington Beach. We had a child. With this child, like 3 years old, I'm in the grocery store with him, and there was all kinds of little things. This kid knew how to say Heil Hitler. He knew how to give the Sig Heil salute.
3 years old, Heil Hitler,
Yep.
the salute,
Yep.
the whole thing.
Yep.
Did he have a little brown shirt?
No, he didn't. He had brown shorts though, quite often.
Little swastika?
No, but
Did you have like swastika
we had
stuff in your
Confederate
house?
flag. Oh yeah.
In your house?
Yeah, guns, all kinds of stuff.
Man.
So I'm in the grocery store with this kid, and he sees a large black man in the store, and he pointed it out. Said, "Look, Daddy, there's a big black," and blurted out the N-word. That didn't shock me as much as, well, first of all the other shoppers in there, like mostly like middle-aged women, were saying, "How dare you? How could you teach a child that sort of thing?" One of the things that I remember him asking was, "Aren't you going to beat them up, Daddy?"
Man.
Which is like, wow, this 3-year-old kid thinks it's okay to go beating up just anybody, right?
But it's not unreasonable for him to expect that,
No.
because that's what you
That's exactly, everything
ascribe
that was
to.
right was wrong, and everything that was wrong was right. This kid was being taught the opposite. So that resonated with me. It wasn't like I woke up one day and said, "Heil Hitler."
What did your wife think about
I'm
you?
a father.
You're a father, but what did your wife think about you indoctrinating your kid this way? Didn't she push back and say this is bullshit?
Not at all, because she was right there with me.
Man.
She was right there with me. There's been times when, before my son was born, she was wearing camouflage and rolling around in the dirt and doing paramilitary training and all that sort of stuff as well. And we were both sober.
And this is a sober, conscious mind state that both you and your wife are in.
Well, I remember telling people the 3 most important things in my life were sobriety, my family, and the survival of my race. And it's crazy. It's really crazy.
Your son has this incident in the store. Then what happened?
You don't just wake up one day and say, "Oh, I'm out." I do believe that sobriety played a major role in the fog lifting. But even more so, most of us have been treated with kindness, compassion, respect by our perceived enemy. And in my case, I traveled quite a lot for work.
You ever go down south?
Oh yeah, I'm living in an area where it's known Ku Klux Klan type activities. I never liked the Ku Klux Klan, even when I was a skinhead. Never liked the Ku Klux Klan. Didn't like their weird religious beliefs. Didn't like their pointy hats. I call them dunce caps.
And that would be correct.
What really penetrated my mind was I had a black supervisor who kept on inviting me over for what he called Sunday supper. And I kept on coming up with excuses. I said, "Well, I don't drink," and So finally he called me into his office, and he says, "I've invited you over for supper several times, and you keep on coming up with lame excuses. What's going on?" And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, uh-oh, somebody told him. Somebody told him my past. Somebody told him, I'm goose-stepping and all this other kind of white power, right-wing stuff. But in my mind, I was going to do it specifically to put food on my family's table.
Yeah, to get him off your back.
To get him off my back.
Right.
So I'm going to go behind enemy lines.
That's what you thought? You're going to go behind enemy lines.
Correct. And in my mind, black folks is, cocaine, Crips, Bloods, Cadillacs, and it's down south, so they got to live in a podunk shack, right, with broken windows.
All the stereotypes.
All the stereotypes.
Right.
Go to this man's house, nothing like that. Didn't have a Cadillac, had a big old truck. And I knocked on the door, and this little kid answered the door in a suit, no tie, because I guess they had already done their other stuff.
Their Sunday church. Yeah,
right.
yeah. Probably were Southern Baptist or something.
I don't know. And they invited me into their house. The little kid was all, "Hello, sir, you must be Tim." And it was awkward because I have all these thoughts in my head, like, what's going on with all the stereotypes that I've been told?
Would it be fair to say that you were, in fact, a racist at that time?
Probably yes, but I would not have called myself a skinhead. Sat down, had a spicy southern Louisiana meal. So I took that experience, and then I would go home. to Ku Klux Klan land where the sky is falling. Oh my God, they're taking over here. They're taking. What are you complaining about? You got nothing but woods around you. Me and my son's mother were just not compatible anymore.
So you were changing, she was not. And your son was not.
As far as I was concerned, yeah.
Because you were traveling for work,
Right.
you were away from them.
Right.
You were growing, maturing, realizing the truth, and what you believed in was bullshit. Your family was not.
Correct. And you know what's really strange is I would come here to work in Southern California, and the racism in Southern California was worse.
It is. It can be, yes.
Than it was down south.
It can be, absolutely. Against Latinos and everything else.
It seems like out here everybody is nice to your face, but behind your back it's a different story. At least down south, you know when somebody doesn't like you. You know when a black person doesn't want to be around a white person and vice versa. It's just apparent. I don't know. It's like an unwritten thing. But so me and my son's mother ended up splitting up. By this time I'm, going to bars, not drinking, but going to meat market. I'm single, right?
You go to the club looking for action.
I'm going to the club. But there was one occasion where somebody said, "Oh, this person likes you. This person likes you. This person likes you." And there's a little redhead from Texas, and she was cute and she's petite, and I kind of like them like that. And I got a thing for redheads too. So I went on a double date with her and a friend of mine from England, and we started to hit it off. We've gone on a couple dates by this time, and I'm walking her to the door, and I'm pulling all the moves, trying to get in there and look good in her graces and stuff. And she says, before we get too serious, I want you to know I'm Jewish. Do you have a problem with that? Another stereotype blown out the door. My idea of Jewish people was, Hasidic Jews, New York City, diamonds, money, media, all a bunch of negative stuff.
Not a girl with a cute redhead from Texas.
And a twang. And we've been married for 24 years. She's put up with a lot. She's never seen me drink. My son's never seen me drink.
Your eyes are tearing up. Why are your eyes tearing up?
They're not tearing up.
Yes, they are.
Come on,
you
now.
Big tough skinhead neo-Nazi. You're crying.
I'm a big marshmallow. I always have been.
I can tell that this part of your life is something that's very special to you.
I learn more about people from breaking bread with them.
Of course. That's why I'm doing this whole podcast.
Right.
This whole podcast is on that same wavelength of if we could just sit down as human beings and have conversations, hard conversations over comfort food in a nice setting and just see each other eye to eye, none of this bullshit that's going on would be going on.
Right. If people don't talk to one another.
And
anymore.
There's a level of grace you have to extend to people.
Sure.
And without it, we're doomed.
Yep. And unfortunately, a lot of people are distracted by, they come home from work, they turn on the television, and they have the idiot box tell them what to think.
My question to you now is, having had this life experience of living a life of hate and violence and wanting to destroy your perceived enemies, black people, Jews, people doesn't matter.
I hated white people more than anybody, believe it or not.
Did you really?
Oh, yeah, because they didn't think like I did. I said, don't you see what's happening?
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what do you think of the cycle of what's going on in this country now?
I think they're, just like I just said, they're all distracted. They have a short memory. There's a short news cycle. Everything's quick, and then we all forget. If you watch television or even listen to some people, they forget what happened 2 weeks ago.
And then the algorithms of all the social media just keep feeding that cycle because that gets the most clicks, the most hits. It's almost like people they're craving to be angry at something.
It doesn't matter what it is, as long as they're distracted from themselves.
So based on your experience and the horrible, shitty parts of your life that you've been, thank God, able to transform into a positive end.
And that takes work.
It takes work. You have to work on yourself, right?
Correct.
And for you, it was a 12-step recovery program, but you were also, I'm perceiving, willing to open your eyes to see a different side of humanity. People who are different than you, different culturally, different religious perspectives.
Correct.
Whether it's Muslim or whatever. You just see them as human beings and not, oh, well, they're different than me, so I have to
You know,
hate
something
them.
that really, I was involved with like the atheist type people. It's called the World Church of the Creator. It's all about humanism, and religion is a means by which to control the masses and all that other kind of stuff. But my sponsor told me, go meditate anyhow. Just go do it. And it was weird. But like anything that you've never done before, it's weird. Just like sitting down with your perceived enemy. At first, it's uncomfortable. And then once you start to relax, it becomes more tolerable. Well, I took that 11-step move, prayer and meditation, to another level. It got to the point where the 12-step meditation stuff wasn't enough. There's other recovery groups that are like Buddhist based, and I found that most of them are people with long-term recovery who are working two programs but combining the two together. And like at a 12-step meditation meeting, it's like 20 minutes tops. I was meditating for like 2 hours, 3 hours with some of these folks. But I take a little bit of everything and combine it together, because why do they exist in the first place? They have to have something positive about them. There's a lot of negative in religion too.
Well, I would say, in my opinion, it's about a relationship with something greater than
Correct.
yourself. Religion gets all fucked up because of man.
This is
Man
true.
is in the middle of it, and that's what screws it up.
Yep.
So you take man out of the equation, and you work on a relationship with a higher power, whether you believe it's God or nature or Mother Nature, whatever it is.
Or the group.
Or the group that's just outside of your own power and control, and seems to be working a lot better.
I do a lot of meditation.
Well, that's great. So your life today, when you look back at your life before, skinhead, neo-Nazi, all that kind of stuff, do you have any guilt or shame, or have you let that go?
Well, what had happened was there was the person who I had beat up when I was 17 years old ended up working with me at the Museum of Tolerance.
No.
And one thing led to another.
This is the gay prostitute?
Yep.
The gay prostitute in Hollywood, or
Yep.
West Hollywood, that you beat up and left for dead. You met up with him at the Museum of Tolerance.
And he was my supervisor. If that's not a higher power, I don't know.
I totally agree with that. And how did you reconcile? Did you reconcile?
We did reconcile, but we had worked together for probably 6 months to a year before we realized who each other were.
Wow.
We had sat down and had a conversation. We were breaking bread.
Wow.
And we were talking about our past and whatnot, and one thing led to another, and we figured out who each other were. Now, of course, as a person in recovery, my first response is, when we're wrong, we promptly admit it. Took a while, took about a week. Next time I saw him, I apologized. I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. It really wasn't any of my business. And we've been friends and in fact, we just did presentations weekend before last at a juvenile detention facility up in the Bay Area. So we still work together. We've done documentaries together.
That's amazing.
It's really strange because we've both seen each other go through sort of hard times, but we both come out better people.
That's an amazing story.
He's like a family member to me.
Wow. God bless you for making that work. That's just, oh man, I got like chicken skin over that one. That's great. And so I've heard this term, you take your mess and you become the messenger. You feel that's what you're doing now? Do you try to talk to young people about their direction and their thinking? And
I do. That's why I spoke at the juvenile detention center, and I spoke at a couple schools as well. I used to do presentations every week.
Wow, that's great.
But I'm starting to slow down now. I'm getting a little bit older, and there's other people like me who can do the same thing, who I think need the opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
One of the things it's just like alcoholism. I don't believe you could shake the hate out of anybody. They have to do it on their own, and they have to come to their own moments of clarity. Their process. Every person is different.
I am praying for this nation, because we are a hateful nation right now.
Yes.
In my opinion. We are angry everywhere. We hate what we don't understand. We hate what we don't, necessarily believe in. It's okay to disagree, but to hate something or another person because they think differently.
Right.
Vote
differently or whatever.
It's just getting batshit crazy out there right now. And so I'm praying for this nation, and it gives me hope that people like you can find a pathway out. And I'm so glad that we can share your story on this podcast that hopefully somebody who may be struggling with some of these things can think about it. But as you say, you have to find it within yourself to want to change, because I will say, even from my own life experience, carrying around resentment and anger and being mad at the outside world all the time is exhausting. It never leads to anything positive, and you just become the maker of your own misery.
One of the things, we want to change the world. People say, how do you change the world? How do you change the world? Well, it's not going to be done en masse. It starts with you. It starts with you first. My perception and the way that I react or respond to certain situations makes or breaks the whole situation. I know when to walk away. Let them stay in their lane or whatever. I just had an incident recently where I had somebody confront me about something or whatever. I didn't really know them or anything, and I just walked away. My pride is not, my ego is not built up to the point where, I'm not to say that I don't have an ego and they don't have pride, but I'm not going to waste my headspace with something that I have no control over.
Right. Well, Tim, God bless you. Thank you. Wow, I'm just blown away by that story. And the only thing I can say to you, a former skinhead and neo-Nazi, is Mazel Tov.
Thank you, sir.
All right, if you think you have an issue with alcohol, narcotics, gambling, sex, eating, or something else, you can visit organizations like AA.org for alcoholics, NA.org for narcotics, GamblersAnonymous.org, obviously for a gambling problem, SAA-recovery.org or SLAAFWS.org for sex and love addiction, to name a few. And I'll post all of these websites on my podcast page at thedinerverse.com. And that wraps up another episode. A big, huge thank you to Cosmos Bistro in Glendora, California, the pride of the foothills. Learn more about them at cosmosbistroglendora.com. That's all one word. Theme music by Keith Brock and the Kings Who Rock. Across the Dinerverse, always searching for the heart and soul of America, one diner at a time. I'm John Murphy. What's your story?